Hi everyone. This video is specific for practitioners that work with people with brain injury. There's another version of this video for everybody else, including people living with brain injury, their caregivers, family, friends, and loved ones. So this video is meant to show you how to navigate the process map for practitioners and individuals seeking housing in Toronto after brain injury. The Brain Injury Society of Toronto, or BIST, Advocacy Committee created this document to try and fulfill a need. So we wanted to consolidate as many resources, as many options, and as many sources of funding and government benefits as possible. So please note that although this document was tailored for people with brain injury, anyone who is low income or disabled or struggling with other factors such as mental health, justice system, addiction, etc., will find something useful from this document. The reason we called it a process map is because it does include step-by-step instruction for the process of finding housing in Toronto. And so we wanted to make sure that new practitioners and everyday people would be able to know what the important steps are to prepare for searching for housing and how to maintain good relationships with landlords. So please note that this is not an exhaustive list, which is why we encourage you to send an email to info@bis.ca if you discover errors or if you learn of updates to programs or new resources that we may have missed so that we can update this document periodically. So I'm Allison Fu, and I created this document with help from Colleen Worsley, who is a social worker, Laura Pisano, who works in public health, Bob Murphy, who is a very powerful advocate for the brain injury community and is well known to certain members of parliament, as well as Julie Osbelt and Kathy Halovanik. I apologize if that's not how you pronounce her name. Julie and Kathy are both ABI system navigators. Julie also works for the Toronto ABI network, which is going to be likely your first step in trying to apply for supportive housing. Kathy is also associated with Cheers. We also have an accessible version of this document available. I will show you the accessible components for the accessible version at the end of this video. Throughout the document, you will see the terms client versus individual. Both of these terms refer to the person with a brain injury. We've highlighted the resources in light blue that are specific to people with brain injury. And if you are looking for community supports or services offered in languages other than English, please see the central link ABI Resource Library by Neurotrauma Pathways. I'll point out right now that most of the resources are hyperlinked. So if you hold down the control key and click on that link with your mouse, it will open to the website. The first step really for applying for brain injury specific supportive housing is to contact the Toronto ABI network. And for all of the resources that you can access or get referrals to through the ABI network, we've highlighted those in green throughout the document. We've also provided their contact information here. Now we want to be very realistic about the wait times. So there are currently very long wait lists for subsidized housing. Right now it's a minimum of 10 years. You can actually find more information about wait times if you click on this link here. And we want it to be clear that at this time, unfortunately, having a disability does not qualify people for priority group. And the ABI waitlist is not intended for people that are just coming out of rehab. So up next, we have the table of contents. Once again, all of these are hyperlinked. Just click on the control key on your keyboard and then scroll over the item you want and then click it with the mouse. Take you to that section. So this is broken up into 6 sections. The first one is the quick navigation tool based on scenarios. And this one is specifically designed for practitioners like yourself. Section 2 is where we have the step-by-step instructions. There are 6 steps, and we'll go through each of the steps soon. Section 3 is our list of program funding sources and housing options specifically for children or youths. And then there's a section specifically for Indigenous peoples. And then there's a section specifically for seniors and separately for veterans. For section 4, it's a list of resources for people with comorbid factors other than brain injury. And the last section is a summary of changes, so you can see what's been updated since the last version you had. So moving on to section 1, which is a quick navigation tool for practitioners, but we do still encourage all practitioners look through all of the steps in section 2. So we tried to pull out some of the most common scenarios. So for example, in scenario 1, the client is not able to stay in their current housing because of financial barriers. You will note that each of these scenarios have footnotes because our clients all have a lot of unique intersectionality. And so we want to make sure that you are covering your bases in terms of other programs and services that they might qualify for because of other identity components and other comorbid factors. So scenario 2 is where the client cannot return or stay in their current housing because it's no longer safe for them. Scenario 3 is where a client requires temporary housing to offset their care needs. And scenario number 4 is where the client requires immediate crisis temporary lodging. So once again, very important, I want to point out the footnotes here. The first footnote is for those that may qualify for specialized services based on their identity or their age. The second footnote is resources for those that have comorbid factors. And the third footnote is for those that may have some sort of insurance coverage. Section 2 is a process map and the main part of our document. It has 6 steps. For most of the steps, there is a flow chart with yes or no questions, steps that we recommend following, and then footnotes to indicate a list of potential resources. Step 1 is about determining whether or not it's an option for the client or the individual to stay in their current housing, and then lists of potential funding sources in order to support them accordingly. It's also broken down based on their level of care needs. So for example, 24-hour care versus minimal or moderate support needs. And as you can see in blue, we have resources that are specific to brain injury. So footnote 1 is the potential sources of funding for housing and housing-related costs. And it's broken up categories such as for preventing homelessness, for those already experiencing homelessness, for those requiring 24-hour care, and for those with minimal to moderate support needs. Now, one thing that's very important to note is that these columns are read top down. So you would read here and then come back up to read here in that order. So I hope that's not too confusing, especially when it spans across multiple pages. So the next footnote is resources for in-home care or respite care, with a clarification that respite can mean different things. Potential sources of funding for assistive technology, specific to accessible home modifications, immediate crisis lodging options, options for short-term housing. Step 2 is to identify all potential sources of funding for income or disability. Step 3 is to develop and manage the relationship between the landlord and the tenant on an ongoing basis. Footnote number 1 are resources for mediating landlord-tenant conflict or evictions. For step 4, it's about planning and preparing logistics for the housing search. Step 5 is for searching and applying for long-term housing options. This one's also broken up based on the level of care needs. So for example, if the client or individual needs 24 hours care, then we recommend applying for supportive housing options. If they need minimal to moderate support, then we recommend applying for housing with supports or safe housing. For the first footnote, there are a list of potential key search terms to help support your search for supportive housing options. And as you can see here in green, your first step is to contact the ABI network in order to get referrals and information about these possible supportive housing programs. For the second footnote, it's about searching for assisted living or safe housing options for those with minimal to moderate support needs. Here are some key search terms and key search areas, and just a couple of resources about how to get informed about avoiding rental scams, because they are quite common now. Here is a list of safe housing options. And once again, these are not exhaustive lists. There may be others. Footnote number 3 is about housing service navigation resources, hubs, and application portals. And unfortunately, given the long wait lists in Toronto, we do also recommend considering looking outside of Toronto. So that means options within the Greater Toronto Area or GTA, and even other cities within Ontario. Now, these are just a handful of resources for you to start with your search for those options that are outside of Toronto. It's broken up based on funding, transitional housing, emergency lodging, supportive housing, safe housing, and then housing service navigation resources. Step 6 is for searching for other local programs and supports that can increase income or reimbursements for other living, medical, or therapy costs so that the client or individual can allocate more funds toward housing. This is just a handful of examples. Please search locally to find other options. We also have just a handful of resources for support groups and programs for caregivers. We really hope that practitioners will keep an eye out and support those caregivers how they can as well. Section 3 consists of tables with resources specific to children and youth, Indigenous peoples, seniors, and veterans. Section 4 are a list of resources for people with comorbid factors. So that can include mental health, addiction, justice, crisis, developmental disability, diabetes, HIV, or AIDS. If it's pet friendly, it will be at the beginning of the bullet of the resource. And on the last page, we have a table for the summary of changes. Here is the accessible version of this document as indicated in the title. We recommend reading it in Word format, especially if you're trying to use apps. Now, the main difference about this document is that after each flowchart image, there is a written out text version of each step in that flowchart. So it'll say accessible text version of step 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 flowchart. It corresponds to the flowchart. So for example, in the flowchart on the image here, the first question is option to stay in current housing, yes or no. And so the first step here in the text version is ask whether the individual has the option to stay in their current housing. If yes, do this, and if no, do this. And see footnote number 5. And so it reflects this flowchart process where if no, do this with this footnote number 5, and if yes, do these 2 things. The next step is to ask these questions about the level of care. So here in the second step of the written text, it says, ask whether the individual needs 24-hour care. If yes, do this. If no, do these things. And then as the last step, to ask them about whether or not they need physical accessibility. If yes, do this. And if no, do this. So this saves people from having to interpret the flowchart or from people that aren't able to see the flowchart clearly. Thank you so much, and good luck with finding safe, affordable, or supportive housing.